We finally have Sienna's 4th career, and it's a banger. Fat Shark kind of made a bold decision in making the last career a Necromancer because lore reasons, but I respect them for going out on a limb, and they actually gave us a class that plays different than all of Sienna's other careers. In this video, I'm going to be giving you what I believe is the best build for her and the best weapons for her, as well as the strategic approach to playing her. Everything is in the context of playing in Cataclysm, but definitely applies to all the difficulties. So let's get this thing started. Let's get into the guide. And first up, I want to talk about melee weapons. And there's 3 I'm going to talk about in this video. That being the Blaze Reaper, the Flaming Flail, and the Dagger. And since the Reaper is new, let's start with that. And it is good enough. It's not as good as the Flail or the Dagger, but it is definitely good enough to run in Cataclysm. If you like the way it looks, if you like the way it feels, absolutely run it. For properties, you want crit chance. I don't have the right stats for some reason. You want crit chance and block cost reduction with swift slaying on the trait. The Reaper has a somewhat complex moveset, but for horde clear, we really just want to do heavies. But you should also be throwing in the weapon special here and there. The weapon special will stagger enemies in a circle around you. That will help you when the horde gets really dense or if you're in a really bad situation. Now, mind you, it doesn't do all that much damage, so you need to mix in your horde clear combo with this. And now, the best combo I've found for dealing with armored enemies is light, light, heavy, light. It's kind of an odd combo, and ideally you would be able to block cancel after that heavy, but the thing is the heavy has like a long recovery time where the block cancel timing for it is super awkward, so I found it better to just do the light after the heavy to reset the combo. You could probably get away with spamming heavies, but this combo is the optimal one. And that's really all there is to the Reaper. Like I said, the main problem with it is that it's really just very slow, but it looks sweet and is very on theme, so if you like it, absolutely run it. But then let's talk about the Flaming Flail. And this is the weapon that pushes Necromancer into S tier. It is just insanely good. Like all of the melee weapons we're running today, you want crit chance and block cost reduction for the properties and swift slaying on the trait. And with this weapon, you could probably get away with just spamming your heavies the entire game, but there is some nuance. So technically, your best horde clear combo is light, heavy, light. But the thing is, with the Flaming Flail, the first heavy is incredibly powerful, especially with the build we're going to be running. It's an overhead that will do a blast around it that will set enemies on fire. You mix this with Cursed Blood, it is absolutely insane, to the point where it almost acts like a shield bash. And so to demonstrate, I've spawned about 150 Skaven slaves, and you'll see that just like a shield weapon, 2 heavies and they all die. Having the ability to do that with a weapon that also has other good combos for horde clear makes the flail maybe one of the best in the game. An important thing about that first heavy is that you don't get temp HP from killing the enemies. I tried it with both Corpse Maker and Death Dealer, and you only get the temp HP from killing the enemy you hit directly with the mace. So you don't necessarily want to spam that first heavy if you are trying to get temp HP. So what I like to do is kind of modify the horde clear combo to start it with the first heavy and then go into the combo. So what that looks like is heavy, heavy, light, light, heavy. And if you start to get overwhelmed by the horde, I just start spamming the first heavy with the block cancel. Because by the way, if that first heavy crits, it will one-shot every Skaven slave it hits. Your combo for dealing with armored enemies is heavy, heavy, light. Again, you can totally get away with spamming the heavies, and you can also get away with just doing the first heavy and block canceling. Spamming the first heavy will give you a bit more crowd control, to the point where you can kind of soft stun lock a Chaos Warrior. It's nothing crazy like the bill hook, like you can't stagger it out of its overhead, but nonetheless you will get some good crowd control. And then we have the Dagger. And the Dagger is usually just a good weapon. The thing is, we have the Reaping talent, which makes it a lot better at clearing hordes, like a lot better. And the main thing you need to know about the Dagger is that the first heavy is kind of like a shield bash. It has unlimited cleave, and from my understanding, you actually do get temp HP from Corpse Maker. If you start to get overwhelmed by a horde, again, you can just spam the first heavy with a block cancel. But outside of that, your best horde clear combo is to just do chain lights. But similar to the Flaming Flail, it's not a bad idea before you start doing your combo is to get that first heavy in. This will set the enemies on fire, which makes you do more damage to them, and also will stagger pretty much everything it hits. But the dagger does kind of struggle against armored enemies. Your combo for dealing with armored enemies with the dagger is just heavy, and really it's the second heavy that is doing the most damage here. So if you need to whiff the first one to position for the second one, absolutely do so. And it's important to note that the dagger has really good scaling with crit and headshots. So you're not really going to be doing much damage unless you are getting headshots. This makes it really good against Skaven since they're really easy to headshot, and really good in the hands of good players. So you absolutely need to aim for the head with the dagger. And that does it for the melee weapons. The Reaper is good enough if you like to use it. The Flaming Flail is the most meta melee weapon, and the dagger is also very good as well. So then let's talk ranged weapons. The new staff we got, the Soul Stealer staff, is the one that I have been running. The main reason is it gives me an option to help with special sniping, but it has a bit more niche use, in that it's specifically good for killing the long range specials. If you take Power vs Chaos, Power vs Armored on the weapon, and then Power vs Chaos and Armored on your charm, then you will be able to one-shot everything with a right click, which it's really important that you're able to one-shot a Blightstormer with this weapon. The right click works similar to the Brain Burst in Darktide, but it's not as lenient. You need to have line of sight. There is no range on this. It has infinite range, but unlike in Darktide, you can't just log onto it, start charging it, and then turn around. You have to keep aiming at it within a certain distance. The breaking point is around 45 degrees. And I know being able to one-shot all of the specials in Vermintide without having to aim really sounds like it's amazing, but hold on a second. It is not nearly as quick as whipping up the crossbow, shooting, and then taking your melee weapon back out. Which, if you haven't gathered yet, that is a very important part of special sniping, is being able to pull the weapon out, shoot, and then pull your melee weapon back out to block. This saves you from taking chip damage or even going down while you're sniping specials. Now, since you can't do that with this weapon, you have to sit there and hold it. It can be kind of tricky to kill specials without getting hit from behind. You have to be very aware of what's happening around you. And for this reason, I don't consider this to be like a main special sniping weapon. Rather, you're there to support the other special snipers, ones that maybe aren't able to kill the Blightstormer that's a mile away. But nonetheless, being able to one-shot a Blightstormer from really far away is what has me running this weapon on pretty much all of my Necromancer games. An alternative would be the Coruscation Staff if you don't want your team to see anything. Ever since the Coruscation Staff has come out, we've all pretty much known that it is one of the best staffs. But the thing is, particularly on the Necromancer, it makes it very hard for your team to see. Like, you mix that in with your summons, like it's absolute chaos. And also, if you're doing this to a horde, then you're kind of robbing your team of their temp HP, and you're really kind of robbing the melee classes from playing the game. So I don't really recommend taking Coruscation Staff in group play, but more for solo play. I don't see much of a reason to take the Bolt Staff over the Soul Stealer Staff nowadays. Necromancer is not nearly as good as Battle Wizard with the Beam Staff, and I would say that the Conflagration Staff and the Fireball Staff are both pretty solid alternatives if you like running them. So now let's talk about talents. For the level 5 talent, I think Corpse Maker is just the most reliable way to get temp HP. And then for level 10, I would say Reaping is a must-take talent. It is one of the best talents in the game, I think. Giving Critical Strike's unlimited cleave completely enables the dagger and really amplifies the power of the Flaming Flail. And the 25% increased power is really just a cherry on top. If we're playing a meta build, we're not really going to be spamming our staff spells a lot, so Death Ascendant isn't really worth it. And while this talent is actually good as well, it's just not as good as Reaping. For level 15, we always take Smiter when we can. It's the best level 15 talent. I'll skip the level 20 talent now. We're going to come back to it because the level 25 talent, the Curse of Undeath, is probably a must take as well. This gives you just enough tankiness to push you over the edge into S tier. This is really the only talent that gives you survivability. And with our ult being on a relatively low cooldown, as long as you're not taking hits left and right, this is going to make you fairly tanky. Spirit Leech has a niche use, which we'll talk about in a second. And I want to talk about the level 30 talent and the level 20 talents together, because they kind of synergize with each other. Curse of Blood makes it so when you crit an enemy that's on fire, they have an explosion around them that does a decent amount of damage. Now, assuming you're not running the Coruscation Staff, you don't really have a way to consistently apply fire to enemies while you're doing your horde clear combo on most melee weapons. This is where the level 30 talent comes into play. Barrow Blades makes your skeletons set things on fire, which gives you that consistent application of fire on the enemies while you're fighting in melee. So what this means is that if you plan on playing a more melee focused Necromancer, if your team doesn't need someone to be back sniping specials, then this is probably what I would be running. Now, let's say you wanted to play a higher APM Necromancer and you wanted to micromanage your skeletons a little bit more. Then I would take Dread Seneschal, because this talent does make the skeletons work better on their own, but a lot of that depends on how much you're willing to micromanage these skeletons. The charge on this is really good, and being able to do the command defend at the same time makes it so they're going to be tankier. So essentially this gives you a little mini Foot Knight. And in that case, since you're not taking Barrow Blades, I wouldn't take Cursed Blood, so I would take Soul Harvest, mostly because Soul Harvest just provides much more consistent value than Withering Touch does. So to back up a bit, I would take Cursed Blood and Barrow Blades if I wanted to play a more melee focused, don't worry about the skeletons as much playstyle, or I would take Soul Harvest and Dread Seneschal if I really want to micromanage the skeletons. Both are completely viable ways to play. I typically prefer to play this build. Also, Army of the Dead makes it so there's no cap to how many skeletons you can have, which is hilarious. It's kind of a meme talent. So if you wanted to meme around and just have an army of skeletons, you could take this, you could take Army of the Dead and then Spirit Leech, and then, I don't know, maybe have a Ranger Veteran pooping out concentration potions for you, and you can live out your fantasies of being an all-powerful Necromancer. But if you're playing meta, I would stick to either this or this. So now to get into the strategy for the Necromancer, the first thing we need to talk about is something that is integral to the class, and that is how to use your ult and how to use the and keep in mind this is all in reference to playing on Cataclysm. Now I've found the damage that the skeletons do to be not meaningless, but not necessarily meaningful, and that they're not going to solo a Chaos Warrior in any meaningful amount of time, or a Storm Vermin or anything like that. But the main thing they can do is stagger them. So if you have a Chaos Warrior by itself and you command your skeletons to attack it, then it's going to kind of soft stun lock the Chaos Warrior. It's kind of here and there whether or not it's an actual stun lock. Really, I've found that it is best to use the skeletons mainly for their ability to stagger things. That's mostly outside of a horde situation, because when you get into a horde situation, the way you use them is completely different. And there's a few ways you could approach it, right? If your team needs no help at all controlling a horde, then you don't even necessarily have to send your skeletons in. In that case, what you might do is right-click command the skeletons to defend behind you guys. So that way you're not taking any trickle damage from mobs that randomly run around behind you. And they do an okay job at this, but they're not going to hold a full horde wave at bay. Now, if your team lacks a front line, you could send the skeletons in, and they do a pretty good job of holding the line against a horde, as long as you're in there too in melee fighting the horde. And again, how much you micromanage them is going to determine how useful they actually are. And I'll show you the way I typically use them. I'll use an example of me playing solo using the Corsation Staff. So to fight a horde with this setup, I would start by left-click commanding them into the horde so we get that charge off, and then right-click commanding them to defend kind of in the horde so they're taking reduced damage. In this one, I'm running Dread Seneschal, so they're also going to have the damage boost, at which point I would put a few flame pillars down, charge up the first heavy with the flaming flail, then go in and do my horde clear combo. This works like a charm in a solo game. If you're playing with a group, I've found that generally we don't need much help with hordes unless there are elites, at which case I would probably just left click command the skeletons to attack the elite. Again, they're not going to kill it, but they are going to stagger it and kind of keep it at bay for an amount of time. And I've found that it's not a situation where if you send the skeletons into a horde, they're just going to die. They do a pretty good job of staying alive. And I think that covers fighting a horde with the skeletons, so let's move on to boss fights. And put short and simply, there's not a whole lot different you do when fighting a boss. I don't see the bosses aggroing on skeletons too often, but 99% of the time they just go for the player that they are aggroed on. So really the most micromanaging you do in this situation is just every so often dodge back and left click command them to do more damage. If you have Dread Seneschal, they're going to do an okay amount of chip damage. It's nothing crazy. I'll show the test I did on it with Dread Seneschal. And if you have Barrow Blades, then the damage is going to be mostly negligible, but really it's just there to set it on fire so you do more damage to it. It's worth noting that when you use your ult, it staggers everything in that circle, even bosses, which is nice to have, but it's also worth saying that this is an ult you do not want to be finicky with at all. Anytime you don't have full stacks on the Curse and Death, or you have less than 6 skeletons, you should just pop it. This is mostly because the Curse of Undeath is our main source of tankiness, and I've found that to be really important on this class. I would encourage you to experiment with creative ways of using the skeletons. I'm sure there are some ways you can use them that I haven't thought of. To move to a more general strategy discussion, let's talk about the role the Necromancer Necromancer has. And I would say that the Necromancer is mainly a frontliner. Now, the Soul Stealer staff does allow you some ability to do special sniping, but as I said before, it's mainly for the really long range specials, namely the Blight Stormer, the Poison Wind Globadier, and the Rattling Gunner. So I think what the playstyle ends up being is that you want to make sure that all your flanks are covered, because your skeletons can actually cover a flank while your team is fighting the Horde. And once the flanks are covered, you're in there using your great Horde clear. Because really, I found that the Necromancer's main strength is its incredible Horde clear, and that's mostly because of the Reaping talent. We're okay at killing elites, we're okay at killing specials, and our boss damage is good enough, kind of in the realm of a Witch Hunter captain who's not built for boss killing. But the thing we are really good at is Horde clear. And the other thing we're really good at is killing long range specials. And with the Curse of Undeath giving us a fair amount of survivability, that makes us a fairly well-rounded class. In fact, I might think this is the most balanced DLC class Fat Shark has released, right? Because Grail Knight is incredibly good. Warrior Priest is at the top of S tier. Sister of the Thorn was the best class in the game there for a long time. And then Outcast Engineer is very niche and is good in the right hands, but mostly bad. But then you have Necromancer, who I'd say is a very balanced A tier, maybe S tier class. I haven't decided yet. Now, I will say you will see Necromancers topping the damage charts. Like, I've seen them out damaging good Grail Knight players, right? But the thing you gotta realize is that a lot of that is from Horde clear, when really the important damage in this game is damage against specials and elites. But the fact that we're able to just completely annihilate hordes on the Necromancer makes it so we have really high damage numbers. And I think that will do it for the Necromancer. I think Fat Shark made a bold choice to make Sienna's fourth career a Necromancer, and I respect them for doing it. And I think they've kind of shown themselves to not be afraid to go outside the box and do something different. And the class is quite fun to play. Critting over and over with a Witch Hunter captain on your team feels incredible when you're fighting a Horde. And they made the skeletons just useful enough, right? They didn't make them overpowered. They didn't make them able to annihilate bosses or anything like that. They gave them some utility and just enough damage so it's not overbearing and so it's not meaningless. Anyway, I appreciate you guys spending your time watching, listening to me talk about Vermintide. If you liked the video, like, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.